Tips when investing in Airbnb as a business model. When we think about Airbnb as a business model, effectively what we've got is people coming in to stay for a short period of time. It might be for a night, it might be for a couple of nights, maybe for a couple of weeks. But it's a short period of time, it's not their home. But what they're doing is having an environment probably away from their home for that short period. So what you firstly have to think about is, who is it that's actually going to stay in this property? Who's your customer? And are you creating an environment that's suitable for that customer? So for example, let's say it's a corporate client, i.e. Business clients that are away from home. They may be at a remote office in another city, and you're providing accommodation for them. Where would they ordinarily go and stay? Maybe they stay in a hotel. What type of hotel might that be? Maybe it's a 4-star hotel. So what you're doing is trying to create a product that's an alternative to that 4-star hotel. So rather than staying there, what you want to encourage them to do is come and stay with you. And if that's what you do, you've got to think about what is it that they're looking for, what is it that they need, and does this property meet their needs? On the other hand, it may be you've got some contractors that are doing maybe some construction work on a major building site nearby. There could be engineers that are working there. For example, maybe they're on site with muddy boots and stuff. What's their requirements? Or what is it that they're looking for? And are those needs going to be the same as somebody that's, for example, a corporate traveler? Probably not. Maybe their expectations are a little bit lower. Maybe if they were going to stay in a hotel away from home, maybe it might be a 3-star hotel typically that might stay in. So by understanding the customer, i.e. who you're creating your product for, and matching the needs of your product to that customer means, first of all, you're going to attract the right type of customer. Secondly, we have to look at what's the demand for the type of accommodation you're creating in that specific geographic location. So you could create a fantastic property that looks absolutely stunning. It might suit corporate client, might be premium, top of the market. But actually, is there any demand for that type of a property in that area? And there's a number of tools that we can use, software tools, for example, and other research we can use online to be able to assess demand for a certain type of accommodation. But also, one of the easiest ways is to actually go and look at who else is already marketing in that location, what your potential competitors are doing, what type of products they have in the market, what hotels already exist there, what price points are those hotels pitched at. So this will help understand, if there's a demand and at what sort of price point. Then the third thing to think about is when you're pricing your product, what's included in that and what additionals there might be. So for example, if there's a separate cleaning charge, or that's all included in that, if there's teas and coffees, and are there any other things you're charging additional for? Is it pretty much all inclusive, the figure that you've quoted? And when you compare that to your competitors, how does that fit in? Now, we don't necessarily want to be the cheapest, but we may not necessarily want to be the most expensive either. It could be you've got something that's a unique product and maybe you're pricing it a little bit higher. But generally speaking, we want to be near the top end of the market, but not overpriced. Top end because there's generally more profit margin there. We think that's a better place to be, because generally when you're at the opposite end of the market, either lower end of the market, there's usually a race down to the bottom, and there's no real profit at the bottom. So why would we want to be at the bottom end of the market? We've got more margin when we've got a higher income that we're collecting. And when we look at how much typically we might have collected a night, so let's use some simple numbers. Let's say it's £100 a night that was being charged, and we've got, say, 30 nights in a month. That's £3,000 income potentially from that property. A mistake that I see many people making, particularly when they're starting out, what they're doing is assuming that £3,000 is what they're going to be collecting each month, and they're basing their numbers on that. Well, there's going to be times where the occupancy level isn't going to be 100%. In fact, most of the time, it's not going to be 100% or be lower. And a lot of people do their calculations on 70%. The break-even point often is around the 50% mark. So when you're starting to achieve a 70+% occupancy, for example, 80% or 90%, those you'll find are really profitable when it turns an okay deal into a super profitable deal. But we have to be realistic about what the occupancy levels are, and also the nightly rate, because you could reduce your nightly rate, i.e. the price that you're charging, and your occupancy levels could go up quite significantly, because now you're quite a cheap product compared to the others in the market. And remember what I just mentioned, we don't necessarily want to be the cheapest because there's just a lot less margin in there. So it's trying to get the balance between those two key metrics, which is the nightly rate and the occupancy level, in order to try and get a sensible profit from that particular project. Another thing to be mindful of, if you're doing this, for example, on a rent to rent basis, where you're renting the property from the owner and then providing accommodation this way, you need to make sure that the owner is aware of firstly what you're doing. If it's an apartment block in a building, that there's consents in place in order to be able to do something like that. I remember having a conversation with somebody once. They were looking at an apartment to do as a rent-to-rent or rent-to-service accommodation. And some of the research they did is who else is already operating, and they found another operator in that building. And they just made the assumption, just because somebody else was operating in that building, that it must be okay to do so. And in that case, it wasn't. And ultimately what had happened is that they took on the property, but very quickly they got shut down, because what they hadn't realized is the other person hadn't been running very long either, and they ended up getting shut down as well. So we want to make sure that we've got the consents in place in order to be able to operate it quickly. And then because it's a new venture you're starting, what you don't want to do is get stuck in a long contract. So when we're taking a property on as a rent-to-rent from the owner, one of the things we want to be able to do is build into the contract an ability for us to be able to exit out of it if there's a problem, if there's a change in the market, if conditions change, if there's a lockdown. And then we can get out of that particular contract without suffering, because if we can't generate income, but we have to pay for the landlord every month, very quickly you can start getting into financial problems. And if you've got 2 or 3 properties, for example, and you're a smallish operator, that can wipe some people out. How they're going to sustain that kind of payments each month with no income coming in. So you want to be able to exit out of a deal and not be stuck in it. But at the same time, we don't want to give the landlord the ability to be able to terminate the contract as well. Because it's a little bit like, let's say you were going to open a restaurant, you find a location, you spend time and money and effort and to create this restaurant, and you're trying to drive the business there, and you're trying to get people there and come to it, and you've got it up and running, and now it's time to make some money, and you've been working hard at it for 6 months, and the landlord turns up and says, hey, look, you know what, I've had a change of mind. I want you to close your restaurant and sling your hook because I don't want you as a tenant anymore. I'm actually going to turn it into a pet shop. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, I've been investing all this time and effort in here. I don't want to now have to go and start again somewhere else. They've just wiped out your business. So for that reason, we don't want to give the landlord the ability to be able to just come in at any time and be able to end our lease. So we don't want to give them a break clause, but we want to have a break clause on our side, because if the business isn't working, so we can come out of that particular arrangement. So remember, the location is key. This is one of the key drivers in terms of deciding whether something's going to work or not. And the easiest way to do that is look at the market, look at who else is operating, look at what rates they're charging, because that will help. So as I said, you can create a stunning property in a location that there actually isn't much demand for, and you might find you'll struggle there. Some people assume the only place that short stay works is in the city centre. And yes, that can be the case. It can be that the city centre works well, but it isn't necessarily that's the only place it works. Often we have to think about who's coming to the area and why they're coming there. So for example, in Birmingham, we have a Birmingham airport, we have the NEC, we have the international train station there. So there's a lot of activity of movement of people in that location, and there's a lot of people that travel to that. Now that's probably 6-7 miles out from the city centre. So it's nowhere near the city centre, but it's a great location to be providing short stay accommodation because the number of people flowing through the area. So it isn't necessarily just a case it only works in the city centre. There's other key locations as well. It's looking at where there's a flow of people. And final thing to be mindful of is if you're picking a location which is seasonal. So for example, let's say you're near a theme park, say near Alton Towers in Stafford. And then what you find that during the summer months is just super busy. People are coming, they're staying for a couple of nights, and they're going to the theme park. And then during the winter months, there's actually nobody coming there at all. And the park's closed. And there isn't an alternative source of clients for you to tap into. And so then you find actually that there isn't much of a market during that time. So a seasonal business can work, but you need to make sure during the peak season, you're making significant profits that cover for the quieter season. Hey, if you're enjoying these short videos that we're doing called Saj Dailies, then make sure you also check out our longer form content that we have on the channel. There's probably about 300 videos that are on the channel that we've uploaded over the last few years, and there's a lot more content uploaded regularly. And if you're enjoying it, then make sure you click on that like button. Also subscribe to the channel, but more importantly, leave me a comment. Let me know what it is about these videos you're particularly enjoying and particularly liking. And once you've done that, make sure you click on this video, and I'll see you over here next.